Long before the arrival of Europeans, the Indian Ocean was a place where piracy did not emerge by chance, but as a natural byproduct of trade routes. It was one of the oldest maritime regions in the world where people engaged in regular long-distance commerce. At a time when medieval cities were only beginning to take shape in Europe, fleets of ships were already moving between Africa, Arabia, and India, laden with spices, ivory, gold, and silk. Arab seafarers developed their own maritime traditions here. Dhow-type vessels were built without metal nails, stitched together with coconut fiber rope, yet they were remarkably strong. And most importantly, they were faster than many European ships of the 16th and 17th centuries. Drawing on this tradition, Indian Ocean pirates mastered the monsoon winds, seasonal weather patterns, and treacherous coastal currents with exceptional skill. The Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden offered an ideal environment. Narrow sea lanes, natural hideouts, and the ports of Oman and Somalia created perfect conditions for ambush. Local pirates attacked from fast boats, often with the quiet support of regional rulers. They chose their moments carefully, striking when heavily laden ships were waiting for favorable winds to cross the Arabian Sea. These were swift raids, often brutal and decisive. Pirates here were not merely thieves. In this part of the world, they functioned as unofficial instruments of politics. Some Somali clans regarded raids on ships as a legitimate means of survival. South Arabian cities such as Muscat or Sur sometimes turned a blind eye, as pirates brought them wealth and influence. The relationship between pirates and local rulers was therefore far more fluid than what we later see in the Caribbean. Into this ancient world stepped the Portuguese in the 16th century, cautiously yet with confidence. They believed the Indian Ocean to be as empty and ripe for conquest as the Atlantic. Instead, they encountered an ocean filled with experienced sailors, hardened rivals, and trade networks that had functioned for centuries before their arrival. The Portuguese quickly realized they were not facing isolated pirates, but entire coastal communities, and that the Indian Ocean was no ordinary sea. It was a vast economic system, where Mughal ships carried wealth beyond anything Europeans had previously imagined. Here, in an ocean older than the Caribbean, the foundations of a form of piracy were laid that would later draw in names such as Henry Every, William Kidd, Kanhoji Angra, and Olivier Levasseur. And it was also here that piracy would become more than simple theft, evolving into politics, diplomacy, and open warfare. When the Portuguese rounded the Cape of Good Hope at the turn of the 15th and 16th centuries, they entered a world whose rules they neither knew nor understood. The Indian Ocean was no empty expanse waiting to be discovered. It was a vast economic system with its own laws, balance of power, and trade networks that had functioned for centuries. The Portuguese arrived convinced they could repeat their success from the Atlantic. In Africa and the Americas, their strategy had worked. A chain of fortresses, control of key points, and a monopoly on trade. But here they encountered a problem they had not anticipated. There was no single ruler of the ocean, no empire that could be defeated in one decisive battle. Instead, the coastline was divided among dozens of powers, each with its own fleets, alliances, and interests. As a result, the Portuguese chose to impose control by force. In 1507, they captured Muscat and built a fortress intended to serve as a base for controlling the Arabian Sea. A year later, they seized Hormuz, the key hub of trade between Persia and India. And in 1510, the city of Goa fell, soon becoming the center of Portuguese power in India. But force soon collided with reality. Raiding attacks by local seafarers were frequent and brutal. Omani tribes, organized strikes that wiped out small Portuguese garrisons. Fast Arab dhows from Aden and Mogadishu attacked convoys. India, too, did not stand aside. Local rulers began to coordinate against the Portuguese, as their aggression threatened the flow of trade on which the entire region depended. This marked the first major moment when European presence unintentionally created space for piracy. Naval warfare between the Portuguese and regional powers disrupted parts of the trade routes, allowing smaller groups of attackers to seize the opportunity. The Portuguese succeeded in controlling several key cities, but the Indian Ocean was too vast, too dynamic, and too ancient to be fully dominated. It was at this point that other Europeans entered the stage, this time far more organized. The Dutch East India Company was founded in 1602. It was the world's first true joint stock corporation, complete with its own army, fleet, and the legal right to wage war. It introduced a new kind of corporate rivalry into the Indian Ocean. The Dutch operated differently. They did not rely solely on brute force. They built fortresses, negotiated trade agreements, eliminated competitors, and established a logistical network unmatched by any European power of the time. Yet even they failed to control the entire coastline. The Indian Ocean was not the Atlantic. Each region had its own power structures, rulers, and maritime traditions. The Dutch East India Company found itself fighting wars against the Portuguese, the Mughal Empire, Oman, and smaller coastal states, all while trying to maintain the lucrative trade in gold, pepper, nutmeg, and cloves. Not long after, England entered the contest. The English East India Company was founded in 1600 and quickly realized that securing a share of the immense wealth of the Indian Ocean required readiness for everything: trade, diplomacy, and war. Like the Portuguese and the Dutch before them, the English encountered the realities of the region: fierce competition, powerful local states, and waters filled with adventurers willing to risk their lives for a share of the trade. It was precisely at this moment that the era of piracy, known from the stories of Henry Every, Olivier Levasseur, John Bowen, and others began. Not because Europeans introduced piracy to the Indian Ocean, but because their presence shattered a centuries-old balance. Whenever great powers struggle for control of trade, space opens for those willing to intervene. Quickly, brutally, and outside the law. The Indian Ocean thus became a new battlefield: economic, naval, and political. And the pirates who operated between Madagascar, Africa, Arabia, and India were often little more than products of the chaos that Europe unleashed upon the region. When the first European ships reached the southern edge of the Indian Ocean at the beginning of the 16th century, they encountered a land that seemed almost accidental in its existence. A vast island, nearly 1,000 kilometers long, lay outside the borders of the great empires, yet directly along the routes connecting three worlds: Africa, Arabia, and India. And because monsoon winds dictated maritime movement across the entire ocean, Madagascar quickly became impossible to ignore due to its strategic position. Between 15 and 1600, Portuguese carracks sailed along its shores on their voyages to and from India via the Cape of Good Hope. In the 17th century, fleets of the Dutch East India Company followed, linking Africa, India, and Indonesia. Later still, toward the end of the 17th century, British and French traders arrived as well, and they all shared one thing in common. Sooner or later, their ships passed Madagascar. This was the first reason why a pirate base began to form here. The second was purely practical. The island offered fresh water, timber, fruit, meat, fish, places to repair ships, and sheltered bays hidden from wind and enemies alike. It was not a land of major ports or powerful states. Local communities were scattered and diverse, and their relationship with outsiders was defined primarily by trade. Whoever brought iron, gunpowder, textiles, or weapons became a welcome partner. On the island's southeastern coast, the Portuguese established Fort Dauphin between 1642 and 1674. It was not a successful chapter. The garrison suffered from disease, food shortages, and conflicts with surrounding communities. Yet their brief presence left behind one crucial realization: Madagascar was an ideal stopping point between Africa and India. A century later, that realization was exploited by those who came not to build empires, but to seek opportunity. Between roughly 1690 and 1730 came the era of the so-called pirate round mentioned earlier in the video on brigantines, when dozens of pirates left the Caribbean and Europe and sailed eastward. They sought wealth beyond anything the Atlantic could offer, and Madagascar became their primary base. The most significant location was the small island of Sainte Marie, which became a pirate station in an entirely organic way. Its two deep bays could safely anchor even large European merchant ships. The coastline provided fresh water, fruit, and opportunities for repairs. At the same time, shallow approaches kept the island beyond the reach of most European warships, whose draft was simply too deep. This was precisely why Sainte Marie, from around 1690 onward, functioned as a semi-legal harbor for pirates, privateers, and deserters. Pirates here were not intruders. They were not conquerors or colonizers. They were sailors without a flag, who after months at sea brought exactly what local communities needed: metal, textiles, gunpowder, rum, tools, and sometimes even knowledge. Local rulers negotiated with them because pirates posed no threat of territorial conquest. They wanted no land, only supplies and safe anchorage. As a result, a peculiar relationship emerged, one that later European chronicles sometimes romanticized, but which at the time was simply a rational outcome of mutual necessity. Local populations provided shelter and trade. Pirates supplied goods that would otherwise have been unobtainable, and in some cases even offered protection against rival tribes or raiders. The legend of Libertalia, a supposed pirate republic said to have been founded in the north of the island around 1695, is a product of later literature and imagination. Historical evidence points to no organized pirate state. The reality was far more interesting. Madagascar functioned as a natural neutral zone, a place insufficiently attractive for colonization, yet ideal for those who needed to disappear. This is where the story of Indian Ocean piracy truly begins, not as the tale of a single place, but as the story of a strategic node within a vast system that connected 3 continents. If we were to look at a map of the pirate world around the year 1700, many people would instinctively point to the Caribbean. That is where the most famous legends were born, where stories of wealthy Spanish convoys took shape, and where figures like Henry Morgan or Blackbeard made their names. Yet the true golden vein lay far to the east, in regions that Europe of the time understood only superficially. And it was the Indian Ocean that transformed piracy from a regional phenomenon into a global one. As we have seen, unlike the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean was not a closed space shared by only a few powers. It was a world of 3 continents, dozens of cultures, and hundreds of trade routes. Each had its own history and its own reason for existence. The waters between Africa, Arabia, and India formed a lifeline that never stopped flowing. And because the monsoon winds dictated a precise rhythm of sailing, every year the ocean filled with ships at the same predictable moments. For pirates, this offered something no other region could: predictability without centralized defense. Another crucial difference lay in wealth. In the Indian Ocean, 4 parallel sources of riches existed side by side, largely independent of one another. Mughal pilgrim fleets laden with silver and jewels, Arab merchant ships carrying pearls and coffee, Indian textile vessels supplying markets across Asia, and African trade routes rich in ivory and gold. Another decisive factor was that pirates did not face a single unified power. In the Caribbean, an attack on Spanish ships triggered a response from the Spanish crown. In the Indian Ocean, however, an assault on a Mughal vessel often sparked diplomatic crises between the Mughal Empire and the English, even if the pirate involved was English only by origin. Attacks on Arab ships could draw in Omani or Yemeni rulers. Responsibility was disputed, authority was blurred, and action was delayed by arguments over who was meant to respond. In the meantime, pirates vanished into straits, the bays of Madagascar, or the maze of African islands. The Indian Ocean thus created an environment that did not merely allow piracy, it almost encouraged it. It was a world where the prizes were immense, protection was local, and response was slow. And when this reality combined with a brief but intense influx of adventurers from the Atlantic, the result was a form of piracy that defied the classic image of the pirate altogether. This era did not last long, barely 30 years. Yet within those 3 decades, the Indian Ocean became the stage for the greatest pirate fortunes in history, the most severe diplomatic crises caused by pirates, and the most complex clash of cultures ever associated with piracy. This was a land of opportunity, and it was also a land where small ships were capable of shaking empires. Thank you for joining me on another voyage into the past, a place where facts blend with legend and long-forgotten names rise once more beneath the black flag. If you enjoyed the video, I'd truly appreciate a subscription, a comment, or a share. And wherever your journey takes you, remember this: history is often darker than legend.